Welcome back to BIM Heroes Radio. This is Episode 8.
Oh, wow. Episode 8 already.
I know, right? Time flies when you're having fun.
It really does.
Anyway, this episode focuses on ethics and integrity in leadership.
Perfect timing, actually.
Yeah. Why is that?
Well, it aligns perfectly with week 8 of your leadership development program.
Oh, that's right. I completely forgot.
No worries, it happens.
So you've all been busy reading about ethical leadership this week.
It seems like it. You've shared a really fascinating collection of articles with us. Lots to dig into.
Yeah, it looks like everyone's ready to dive deep into the complexities of ethical leadership.
Definitely. I mean, this stuff gets pretty complex, right? It's not always black and
Oh,
white.
absolutely not. There are so many different angles to consider. And you know what I love about the articles you've chosen?
What's that?
They offer such diverse perspectives on this topic. I mean, we've got everything from personal values to navigating those really tricky ethical dilemmas that I think pretty much every leader faces at some point.
Oh, for sure. And those dilemmas, they can really keep you up at night sometimes, can't they?
Totally. And the thing is, there's not always a clear-cut answer, which makes it even more challenging.
Exactly. So where do we even begin with all this?
Well, I thought we could start with Maulik Gangani's piece.
Okay.
He's from Tata Consulting Engineers, and he takes this really interesting approach.
Yeah.
He draws upon the wisdom of the Bhagavad Gita, you know, that ancient Indian philosophical text.
Oh, wow. That's a unique perspective for sure. Not every day you see ancient philosophy being applied to, modern leadership challenges.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It's really cool. And what I found so striking about Gangani's argument is that he sees ethical leadership as going way beyond just, personal gain.
Oh, yeah. He's not just talking about, what's in it for me as a leader.
No, not at all. He's talking about a leader's responsibility to really consider the well-being of everyone involved.
Like who?
Their team, their organization, even society as a whole. I mean, it's a pretty big scope.
That's a huge responsibility.
It is. And it really makes you realize just how much potential impact a leader can have.
Yeah, it's not just about, hitting those quarterly targets anymore.
Nope. It's about something much bigger. And Gangani also talks about the importance of self-awareness, right?
Oh, absolutely. That's crucial, isn't it?
Totally.
Yeah.
Because how can you possibly lead others ethically if you're not even clear on your own ethical framework?
Exactly. What do you stand for? What are your core values? If you don't know those things, how can you expect anyone else to follow your lead?
Exactly. And you know, it's interesting. Gangani doesn't shy away from the fact that this can be really challenging.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Because leaders often have to balance their own interests with the interest of the group.
Right.
And that's not always easy. Sometimes those interests are aligned.
And sometimes they clash.
Exactly. And then what do? It's a tough spot to be in.
It is. And speaking of tough spots, this leads us perfectly to the next article, which is by Ralph Montague.
Oh, yes. Ralph Montague. He's got some really interesting things to say.
He does, and he comes at this from a slightly different angle, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, he presents this, really intriguing idea about diversity in ethics.
Diversity in ethics. Okay, tell me more.
Well, basically, he's saying that everyone kind of has their own unique ethical framework.
So it's not like a one-size-fits-all kind of thing?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
He describes these frameworks almost like personal navigation systems.
That's interesting.
Yeah, we all have these internal compasses, right?
Yeah.
That guide our decisions and actions.
Right.
And he's saying that these compasses, they can differ dramatically based on individual experiences and the cultural backgrounds.
Oh, yeah, that makes total sense when you think about it.
It does, doesn't it? I mean, what might be considered ethical in one culture could be totally unacceptable in another.
Right. And think about all the different experiences we all have, right? Different upbringings, different education, different everything.
Right. It all shapes our perspective. And it raises some really interesting questions, too, doesn't it? Well, how do you even begin to manage, diverse ethics within a team or organization? I mean, how much tolerance is acceptable, especially in the name of, diversity and inclusion?
Those are some really tough questions. And I think Montague, he does a great job of kind of tackling them head on. He
does. He acknowledges that there's definitely a line, right?
A line between
respecting individual differences and allowing behavior that could be harmful to the group,
right?
To the team, to the organization,
Yeah, you can't just let anything fly in the name of diversity.
Exactly. So what does he suggest?
Well, he seems to advocate for this balanced approach.
Okay.
Where you set really clear ethical standards for the team, but at the same time, you're also creating the space for people to grow and develop their own ethical awareness.
It's like finding that sweet spot, right?
It is, where
Yeah.
everyone feels respected, but also understands that there are certain boundaries that can't be crossed.
And that those boundaries are there for a good reason, right? To protect the well-being of everyone involved.
Right. And he also talks about leading by example.
Oh, yeah, it's a big one, isn't
It's
it?
huge, because it's not enough to just talk about ethics, right?
Right.
You have to actually embody them in your own actions.
Like walk the talk.
Totally.
Yeah.
And that's what truly sets the tone for the team.
Okay, so we've got self-awareness from Gangani.
Mm-hmm.
We've got clear standards and leading by example from Montague.
Yep.
Now let's bring in Larry Bridgesmith to the mix. He's got a whole other angle on this.
What's his take?
Trust.
Trust. Okay, interesting.
Yeah, he really hammers home the importance of trust in leadership.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, trust is kind of the foundation of any healthy relationship, right?
Exactly. And that goes for professional relationships too, you know.
Totally. So what does Bridgesmith say about trust specifically?
He brings in some really compelling data from the Harvard Business Review, actually.
Okay.
They did this big study and found that employees in high-trust companies report significantly less stress,
That's good.
way higher energy level,
Even better.
and greater productivity.
Wow, that's amazing.
I know, right? It's like if you can create a high-trust environment, everyone benefits.
For sure. Less stress, more energy, more productivity. What's not to love?
I know, right? It's a win-win for everyone.
Yeah.
And then Bridgesmith goes on to connect this whole idea of trust
Yeah.
to the work of Dr. Kurt Thompson. He's a psychiatrist and neuroscientist.
Okay.
And Thompson says that all humans,
Like all of us.
yeah, all of us have this really fundamental need
For what?
to feel seen, soothed, safe, and secure.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, we all want to feel safe and secure, right?
Absolutely. It's like a basic human need.
Right.
And Bridgesmith argues that high-trust environments are much more likely to fulfill those needs.
Oh, I see. Because when you feel trusted, you feel safer.
Exactly. And when you
Yeah.
feel safer, you're more likely to be your authentic self. Right.
Makes sense. So how do you create this high-trust environment that Bridgesmith's talking about?
Well, he says that these environments are usually characterized by vulnerability.
Vulnerability. From the leader.
Yeah. It's almost counterintuitive, isn't it?
It is. We often think of leaders as needing to be strong and decisive.
Right, like they have to have all the answers.
Exactly. But Bridgesmith is suggesting that true strength actually lies in the ability to, create a space for vulnerability and trust.
Which is pretty amazing when you think about it, right?
It is. So how does that actually play out in, real life?
Well, he talks about the importance of transparency, for example.
Okay. Being open and honest.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And disclosure, you know.
So being willing to share information, even when it's maybe not the most flattering.
Yeah, even when it's tough.
And he's saying that this actually leads to greater organizational success.
That's what the research suggests, yeah.
Wow, that's powerful.
It is. And you know what? It makes me think about another article we have. This one by Gabriel Martins.
Oh, yeah. What's his take?
Well, he tackles this really thorny issue of ethical dilemmas.
Oh, the tough ones, right? Where there's no easy answer.
Yeah, those are the ones that can really keep you up at night.
They can. So what does Martin say about them?
Well, he starts by introducing this, classic thought experiment called the trolley problem. Have you ever heard of that one?
Oh, yeah. Isn't that the one where you have to decide whether to sacrifice one person to save, a larger group?
That's the one. It's a real ethical head-scratcher.
It is. And it's so hard to know what the right thing to do is in that situation.
Right, because every choice seems to have a downside.
Exactly. And Martins uses this thought experiment to kind of illustrate the incredibly difficult choices that leaders often have to make.
Yeah, it's not always so clear-cut, right? Do this and everything will be fine.
Right. And then to make it even more real, he brings it down to earth with some examples from the business world, right?
He does. He talks about dilemmas related to, transparency,
Yep.
conflicts of interest, environmental responsibility.
These are all real issues that leaders grapple with.
They are. And then he even throws in pay equity.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one these days.
It is. And he points out that, in these situations, there's often not a clear-cut right answer.
Which makes it even harder, right?
Oh, absolutely. You have to weigh competing values
Right.
and make the best possible decision you can with the information you have at the time.
It's like a judgment call.
It is. And those judgment calls, they can be really tough.
They can. So does Martins offer any guidance on how to approach these dilemmas?
He does. He talks about ethical principles like justice, beneficence, autonomy, and non-maleficence.
Wow, those are some big words. What do they actually mean?
Well, basically, they're guidelines, right? They can help you analyze the situation from different angles
Okay.
and then make a more informed and hopefully ethical decision.
So it's like a framework for making those tough calls.
Exactly. And I think having a framework like that can definitely take some of the pressure off.
It can, because you're not just like flailing around in the dark. Or
You've got something to hold on to.
a way to guide your thinking.
Exactly. Okay, so we've talked about trust. We've talked about dilemmas.
What's next?
Well, let's shift gears a bit and talk about transparency and accountability.
Okay, another crucial aspect of ethical leadership.
Absolutely. And for this one, we're going to turn to Robert Gittens. He's the owner of BIMSync'd.
Okay, I've heard of him.
Yeah, he's got some great insights. And he draws this really interesting parallel.
Between what?
Social media
Okay.
and the construction industry.
Interesting. I wouldn't have thought to connect those two.
I know, right?
Yeah.
But it actually makes a lot of sense when you hear him explain it.
So what's the connection?
Well, he argues that in both industries, there's often this underlying fear of losing control.
Fear of losing control.
Yeah, and he says that fear can be a major obstacle to transparency.
Okay, I can see that, especially in the age of social media, right? Information just spreads so quickly.
It does. It's like wildfire. And it can be really scary for organizations to give up that tight control over their messaging, you know?
Right, because you never know what people are going to say or how they're going to spin things.
Exactly. And then in construction, where the stakes are so high, I mean, we're talking about people's safety, massive budgets, complex projects.
Right, right.
That fear of losing control, it can be even more heightened.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But here's the thing. Gittens also believes that transparency is absolutely essential for building trust
Okay.
and credibility
With who?
with everyone, your team, your clients, the public.
Right, because if you're not transparent, people start to wonder what you're hiding.
Exactly. So how do you balance these two seemingly opposing forces?
The need for control and the need for transparency.
Exactly. Well, Gittens offers some really practical advice for leaders on this.
Like what?
Well, he suggests crafting a really comprehensive plan
A plan for what?
for transparency.
Oh.
That outlines exactly what information will be shared, how it'll be shared,
Okay.
and who's responsible for sharing it.
So you're not just winging it, basically. No, you're being strategic and intentional about it.
That makes sense.
And he also stresses the importance of consistency, you know.
So, like, if you commit to being transparent, you have to follow through.
Exactly. Even when it's tough.
Even when you'd rather just keep things quiet.
Yeah. And he cautions against, like, retreating to familiarity when things get challenging.
What does he mean by that?
Well, he's saying that it's really easy to fall back on old habits when you're under pressure, right?
Oh, for sure. When things get tough, you just want to do what you've always done.
Exactly. But he's saying that that's often when transparency is most important.
It's like a test of your commitment to ethical leadership, right?
It is. Are you going to stick to your principles even when it's uncomfortable?
That's a good question for all of us to ask ourselves.
It is. Okay, let's move on to another really important aspect of ethical leadership. It's the impact a leader's behavior has on the ethical climate of their team.
Oh, yeah. That's huge. Like, the tone at the top sets the tone for the whole organization. Exactly. And we have two authors who weigh in on this. Daria Zimovets from NIIAT and Solomon Esaiyas from Addis Ababa Science and Technology University.
Okay, what do they have to say?
Well, they both emphasize this ripple effect.
Ripple effect.
Yeah, like how a leader's actions send out these ripples of influence.
I can impact everyone around them.
Exactly. And they can be positive ripples.
Inspiring others to act ethically.
Right. But they can also be negative ripples.
Leading to, like, a culture of dishonesty or corner cutting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's all because of the leader's behavior.
Wow. That's a lot of responsibility.
It is. And you know what? It makes me think of that quote by Simon Sinek. Have you ever heard it?
Which one?
Leadership does not mean being responsible. It's about taking care of those who are in your care.
Oh, that's a good one.
It is, right. And it really speaks to this idea that a leader's actions have a direct impact on the well-being of their team.
So what are some practical tips for leaders who want to make sure they're creating positive ripples?
Well, both Zimovets and Esaiyas talk about the importance of leading by example.
Right. Okay, walking the talk again.
Exactly. And they also stress the need to demonstrate integrity in every interaction, even the small ones.
So it's not just about the big decisions.
Nope. It's about everything you do, how you treat people, how you handle conflicts, how you communicate.
Right, because people are always watching, right? They're taking cues from the leader.
Exactly. And they also talk about fostering open communication, you know.
So people feel comfortable speaking up if they see something unethical happening.
Yes, that's so important, because if people are afraid to speak up.
Then problems can fester and grow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they point out that unethical leadership,
Mm-hmm.
it can have really serious consequences for an organization.
Like what?
Damaged reputation, legal troubles,
Okay.
and even like a toxic work environment where people feel demoralized and disengaged.
Wow, it's really a lose-lose situation for everyone involved.
It is.
Yeah.
And you know what? It's interesting because this whole idea of ethical leadership, it's not just about what happens inside an organization anymore.
What do you mean?
Well, it's also about how businesses interact with the wider world.
Oh, like corporate social responsibility.
Exactly. And that brings us to our last article for this section.
Okay.
It's by Kieran from PeopleBridge, by William Fry, LLP, and he takes a deep dive into the world of corporate social responsibility, or CSR.
Okay, CSR. It's a big topic these days, isn't it?
It is, and it's only getting bigger. You know, people are really starting to hold companies accountable
For what?
for their impact on the world,
Yep.
you know, not just in terms of their products and services,
Okay.
but also like how they treat their employees, their suppliers, the environment, the whole 9 yards.
Right. It's about more than just making a profit.
Exactly. And Morgan does a great job of defining CSR and explaining why it matters so much in today's business landscape.
So why does it matter?
Well, he says that it's not just about like doing good deeds anymore.
Okay.
It's about integrating ethical considerations into every aspect of your business operations.
Wow, that's a pretty big shift.
It is. And he highlights the 4 main areas of CSR:
Which are?
the workplace, the marketplace, the environment, and the community.
Okay, so it's a pretty holistic approach.
It is. And he talks about the practical implications of CSR for businesses, you know.
Like what companies can actually do to be more socially responsible.
Exactly. Things like stakeholder engagement, legal and voluntary measures, governance, partnerships, impact reporting. I mean, the list goes on.
Sounds like there's a lot to think about.
There is. And he even connects CSR to the UN Sustainable Development Goals.
Oh, the SDGs. I've heard of those. They're about creating a more sustainable future for everyone, right?
Exactly. And it's so cool to see how these like global goals are now filtering down into the business world.
Yeah, it's not just governments and NGOs anymore.
Nope. Companies are realizing they have a role to play too.
And you know what? This whole conversation about CSR and the SDGs, it brings us back to a really interesting point that Ralph Montague makes about the performance gap.
Oh yeah, tell me more about that.
Well, he's talking about this discrepancy between what we think, what we say, and what we actually do.
Oh yeah, I think we all experience that to some extent, right?
Totally. It's like we have these ideals about how we want to behave, but sometimes our actions don't quite line up.
Right. And Montague connects this to the knowing-doing gap.
The knowing-doing gap. What's that?
Well, it's this idea that was identified by Pfeffer and Sutton, and they argue that there's often this disconnect.
Between what?
What we know is the right thing to do and what we actually do in practice.
Oh, yeah, I've definitely experienced that. Like, I know I should eat healthier, but then I see that donut.
Exactly.
Like-
It's easier said than done sometimes.
It is. So how do we close this knowing-doing gap when it comes to ethical leadership?
Well, Montague believes that integrity is the key.
Integrity. Okay, what does he mean by that?
He means aligning your actions with your words and values.
So, walking the talk.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he's quick to point out that integrity isn't about being perfect.
Oh, good. Because none of us are perfect.
Exactly. It's about being honest with ourselves about where we might be falling short. Okay. And then taking concrete steps to close that gap.
So it's a process of continuous improvement.
It is. And that, I think, is a really important distinction.
It is. Because it takes the pressure off trying to be perfect, which is impossible.
Exactly. And instead, it focuses on growth and learning and becoming a better leader over time.
Okay, so before we move on to the next part,
Yeah.
I just want to say a huge thank you to all the authors whose work we've discussed today.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
They've given us so much to think about.
They have. And I have a feeling these ideas are going to be swirling around in our heads for a while.
Oh, yeah, for sure. There's so much to unpack here.
There is. And I can't wait to dive even deeper in the next part.
Me neither.
So stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back after the break.
It's fascinating how all these different perspectives converge on this one idea.
What's that?
That ethical leadership is about so much more than just avoiding scandals or, legal trouble.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely not just about staying out of jail.
Right, exactly. It's about creating a culture, like a whole culture of integrity.
Where people feel valued,
Yeah.
respected, empowered.
To do their best work, exactly.
And in that kind of culture, I mean, it doesn't just happen magically, right?
No, it takes work, real effort,
It does.
and commitment from the leader.
To set the tone
Yeah.
and then model the behavior they want to see in others.
It all starts at the top, right?
It really does.
And like we were saying before about Ralph Montague's emphasis on leading by example.
Oh, yeah. Actions speak louder than words.
They really do. Your actions as a leader, they send a message.
They send out, like, ripples,
Ripples, yeah. And those ripples, they can be positive or negative.
depending on the choices you make.
Exactly. So as you continue on your leadership journey,
Mm-hmm.
think about the impact you want to have.
Yeah, what kind of legacy do you want to leave behind?
Right. What will people say about your leadership style? I think those are some good questions to consider.
They're really important questions.
Yeah, and they kind of bring us back to Montague's concept of the performance gap.
Okay, yeah, how do we actually bridge that gap
Yeah.
between, like, our aspirations and our actions?
Well, he suggests that integrity is the key.
Right, integrity,
Aligning your actions with your values.
walking the talk,
Exactly. And being honest with yourself.
about where you might be falling short.
Yeah, because we all fall short sometimes.
We do. And the important thing is to not beat ourselves up about it. Right?
Yeah, no, not at all.
It's about recognizing those areas.
And then working on them.
Exactly. So it's a process, right, of continuous improvement.
Absolutely. And that leads to another important point, I think.
Okay.
Feedback.
Oh, yeah. Feedback is crucial.
So crucial. It's important for leaders to, like, actively seek out feedback.
From their team.
Yep, from their peers, even from, like, those they lead.
It's a 360-degree thing.
Exactly. To get a clear picture, like a real picture of how their actions are being perceived.
And whether they need to adjust their course.
Because sometimes we think we're doing great,
Oh, yeah.
and then we get feedback that's, oh, whoa, okay, not so much.
It can be tough to hear sometimes.
It can. It can be really hard.
But it's so valuable.
It's invaluable for growth.
And development.
Yeah, it's like holding up a mirror
To yourself.
and getting an honest reflection.
Of your leadership style.
Yeah. And sometimes that reflection, it might reveal some blind spots, right?
Oh, totally. Areas where we're not quite living up to our own values.
Or where our actions are having, like, unintended consequences.
But that's okay.
It's okay to have blind spots. We all do.
We all do. It's normal.
It's part of being human.
It is. The important thing is to be open to that feedback.
Yeah, be open.
Reflect on it honestly.
Don't get defensive.
Yeah. Be willing to make changes.
Based on what you learn.
It's all about learning and growing.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned earlier about building a legacy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how you want to be remembered as a leader.
Yeah.
What are some of the qualities that you think of?
When you think about, like, a really ethical leader,
Someone you admire?
yeah, someone you look up to.
That's a great question. For me, I think integrity is huge.
Integrity, for sure.
And empathy.
Yeah. Being able to put yourself in other people's shoes.
Exactly. And a genuine commitment to the well-being of others.
Yeah. Not just yourself.
Not just yourself. No, it's about something bigger.
It is. It's about serving others.
And I think those qualities, they're reflected in their actions, you know?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Ethical leaders, they walk the talk.
They do. They treat people with respect.
They're fair.
And just in their dealings with others.
Yeah. And they're willing to make tough decisions.
Even when those decisions are unpopular.
Because they know it's the right thing to do.
Exactly. And they're transparent in their communication.
They admit when they've made a mistake.
And they hold themselves accountable for their actions.
It's about taking ownership.
It is. And I think when you see a leader doing all those things,
It's inspiring.
it is. It really is. It makes you want to be a better leader yourself.
It does. And it creates this culture.
Where ethical behavior is just the norm.
It's not the exception. It's what everyone does.
It's expected.
Exactly. And it all goes back to those ripples, right?
The ripples of influence.
Yeah. Ethical leaders, they create positive ripples.
That spread throughout the organization.
And beyond.
And those ripples can have a huge impact on the world.
They can help to create a more just, equitable, sustainable society.
For everyone.
That's a pretty amazing thing to think about, isn't it?
It is. And it brings us back to, like, the core of what this whole deep dive is about, you know?
Yeah.
Ethical leadership isn't just about following rules.
Or avoiding getting in trouble.
No, it's about using your influence to make a positive difference.
To leave the world a better place than you found it.
Exactly. And it all starts with the choices you make.
Every single day.
The little things.
The big things.
It all adds up.
So as you reflect on these articles,
Yeah.
all the insights we've discussed today,
Think about how you can embody these principles.
in your own leadership journey.
Yeah, what steps can you take to, like, bridge that performance gap?
Build trust. Create a culture of integrity.
Within your team.
Your organization.
And remember, you're not alone on this journey.
There are other BIM heroes out there.
Who are committed to this, to ethical leadership.
And we're here to support you.
Every step of the way.
Now, before we move on to our final thoughts.
Okay, so I want to leave you with this one final thought.
Okay.
As we wrap up this deep dive into ethics and integrity, it's about ethical ripples.
Ethical ripples.
Yeah. Think about it for a second.
Right?
Every decision you make, every action you take, it sends out these ripples.
Ripples of influence.
Exactly, into the world around you.
And those ripples can be positive or negative.
They can.
Depending on, the choices we make.
Right. So positive ripples, they inspire others.
To act with integrity.
Yeah, and they create a more ethical, more just environment.
But negative ripples, they can do the opposite, right?
They can. They perpetuate those harmful patterns.
Yeah.
Those behaviors that we're trying to move away from.
And they erode trust.
Exactly.
So as you move forward as a leader.
As you lead your teams, your organizations.
As yourself.
Yeah. What kind of ripples are you creating?
That's a powerful question.
It is. Are you leading with integrity?
Are you making choices that reflect your values?
Even when it's tough.
Even when it's really hard.
Yeah, because that's when it really counts.
It does. And are you empowering others to do the right thing?
Or are you turning a blind eye to those unethical behaviors?
Because silence speaks volumes too, right?
It does. And you know what? Even small acts of ethical leadership, they can make a difference.
You can have a ripple effect too, right?
Exactly. So be mindful of the ripples you're creating.
Make them positive.
Contribute to a better future for everyone.
That's what it means to be a true BIM hero.
And speaking of BIM heroes, don't forget to check out the free leadership program on www.ios.
It's a fantastic resource.
For anyone and everyone who wants to develop their leadership skills.
And become a more ethical, impactful leader.
Absolutely. And be sure to subscribe to BIM Heroes Radio.
On YouTube and Spotify.
So you don't miss out on future episodes.
We'll be back soon.
With another deep dive.
Into a topic that's relevant to your leadership development.
Until then, keep learning.
Keep growing.
And keep leading with integrity.